So good afternoon. It is December 20th, 2019, and it's my honor and privilege to interview Mike Grossfeld. Mike, I appreciate you being here. My name is Mitchell Meyers, and I will do the interview this afternoon. Can you tell me your full name?
Michael Howard Grossfeld.
And do you know why your parents selected that name?
Well, my first name I'm named after my father's father. His name was Max, and they gave me the name Michael to start with the letter M, but my Hebrew name is the same as his Hebrew name, which is Menashe.
Very nice. I like that. I didn't know that, but that's great information. So tell me, when were you born and where were you born?
I was born April 29th, 1948 in the Bronx, New York. I'm told at Doctor's Hospital, which was about a block away from Yankee Stadium.
Interesting. And how did your family come to live in Dallas, Texas? Or was there a route that got you to Dallas, Texas?
Well, there was. My dad was a traveling salesman and sold men's suits and sport coats. And Texas and Louisiana was always his territory. And in about the early 60s, a lot of the New York companies, they were New York-based companies, wanted their salespeople to live in the part of the country that they traveled so that they could call on their customers more frequently. So we ended up moving here in January of 1962.
And tell me about your childhood from when you moved here. I guess you wouldn't, did you have a nice childhood in New York, in the Bronx? Did you?
Yeah, I guess, you know, I had a wonderful childhood. I had a tragedy in my life that still live with today, and that is, unfortunately, my mother died in 1959. But, you know, I had a fantastic father who took over the child rearing of both myself and my brother. But obviously, that's a very sad part of my life to lost my mother, but in general, my childhood in New York, I had nothing but great feelings about it.
And what's your mom and dad's name?
My father's name was Joseph Grossfeld, and my mother was Helen. Right.
And what about your grandparents again?
So my grandparents, both sets of grandparents, also lived in New York when we lived there. However, my grandfather had died before I was born, my father's father. But my grandparents on my father's side were Joseph and Jenny Grossfeld, and on my mother's side they were Harry and Rose Eisenman.
Very nice. So when you got to Dallas, where did you go to elementary school?
So when I came to Dallas in 1962, I actually was in the 9th grade. And I went to Benjamin Franklin Junior High, and then on to Hillcrest.
Okay. And was your family religious when you moved here, or
not really? We joined my dad. I grew up in New York, conservative, but for whatever reason, I never questioned my dad. We joined Temple Emmanuel, and I was confirmed. I was bar mitzvahed in New York, but I was confirmed in 1963 at Temple Emmanuel.
And tell us where you were bar mitzvahed. Do you remember that?
I was bar mitzvahed at the Fresh Meadows Jewish Center in Queens, New York. I was born in the Bronx, and when we were 2, we moved to Queens.
Okay. And so you went to Benjamin Franklin High School, and were you part of any Jewish organizations?
Well, I was in BBYO just like everybody else at the time. Initially, I was in Brandeis AZA, and then actually became friends with your brother and several other people, Mark Shore, and they were all members of Kaplan, and I was still kind of the new guy on the block, and they allowed me to switch chapters, so I went from Brandeis to Kaplan.
Excellent. So there's this thing called the Christmas Day Classic that you were part of. I guess it started with the Kaplan AZA bunch.
It did.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
It's probably one of my greatest memories in life, not only from when the Christmas Day Classic began, but just over the years of all the camaraderie and all the friendships that we've been able to keep up with over the years. So literally it was a football game that in 1965, a bunch of Jewish boys were always looking for something to do on Christmas Day, and we started gathering. We decided, let's go over to the JCC and we'll play some tackle football. And I did say tackle football. because that's the way the game started out. But you know, we had an original core group, which over the years just grew and grew and grew. And some of our friends' siblings, you're one of them, were able to begin playing the game. We ended up having our children playing the game, and now we have some of our grandchildren playing the game. So here it is, Christmas coming up next week. We're going to have the 55th, I believe, 55th or 56th Classic coming up.
So that's great. And could you talk a little bit about your high school years? Like, you know, where'd you go to high school again?
So I went to Hillcrest,
Okay.
and you know, all I have is good memories of high school. Really, it was easy for me to make friends once I got here. My first friend here, we need to record this in history. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. My first friend was Ira Tobolowski. And what I'll say about Ira is I had been at Franklin Junior High for 3 days, and at that time I'd not known a soul yet. And I was sitting in the lunchroom by myself, probably the third day, and someone taps me on the shoulder and turns around and goes, "Hi, are you new here?" Well, it was back in the day when people weren't wise guys the way we are probably today. And I turned around and I said, "Yeah." I said, "We just moved here." And he said, "Well, I'm Ira Tobolowski." He said, "Let's be friends." And that became my first friend, and you know, was a friend of mine all these years until he unfortunately tragically died several years ago.
Yeah, no, sad. In high school, can you talk about your influences at the time, such as music, culture, politics, anything you can recall? I mean,
Yeah,
this was
you know,
a tumultuous time, right?
A very tumultuous time, but I'd say the more I got involved in politics was probably in my college years, but the big event in my high school years was in 10th grade in November 1963 when President Kennedy was assassinated. And, you know, up until that point in my life, you're a young kid, you really don't think about that type of stuff. So that had a pretty big impact on my life, and I think most people in my generation, that we were kind of in an age of innocence, and then this president that was so highly thought of, his life was taken, and you know, it was a wake-up call.
And especially in Dallas, right?
No doubt about it, no doubt about it.
So that's one of the events that
Yeah.
impacted your life?
Yes,
you'd say?
I'd say that.
And before you went to college, was there anything, I understand that your father left to go back to New York?
Yes,
You talked about
so what's interesting is that when I was in my senior year at Hillcrest, the part of my history that I hadn't discussed with you yet is after my mother passed away, but before we moved to Dallas, my father remarried. And then his company in January '62 said, "Joe, we want you to move to Texas." My father's current wife at the time did not want to move yet. She was a teacher in New York, and she said she still had a couple years to retirement. So my father basically took my brother and I, you know, straight down to Dallas. By my senior year, things were not going real well with my father and his job. And he still was married to my second mother in New York. And he made the decision to take a job up in New York and to move back to New York. And of course, you know, I said, "Dad, I'm going to be a senior at Hillcrest. I have all these friends. You know, I don't want to go back." So my dad knew your mother from my friendship with Ronnie Meyers, knew Estelle Meyers, and Estelle offered for me to live at the Meyers house. So basically, most of my senior year in high school, I lived with Ronnie and Seth in one room, Jody was in another room, and Mitchell Meyers was in the other room, and you know, Estelle Meyers, this amazing human being, took care of all of us and treated me like I was one of her kids. So, you know, it's an uncommon story, but it worked out great. I graduated high school, and I got accepted to the University of Connecticut because my dad wanted me to rejoin him, move back up to New York. And I did that summer, and was all set to go to University of Connecticut. My father became ill that summer, had some serious heart problems. And I guess to make a long story short, he met a woman doctor in the hospital, a Jewish woman doctor, who basically convinced my father that he had a bad heart because he had a broken heart, and that the woman that he was with was really not good for him. And she thought that he ought to move back down to Texas, find a job down there, get his son back to Texas, because his son had a great life there. And in September of that year that I was supposed to start college, we moved back to Dallas. So all my friends thought, boy, this is the last we've seen of Mike Grossfeld, and I show back up. But for me, it was a very, very happy time, because even though I was happy to rejoin my dad after I graduated high school, I wasn't necessarily happy being up in the Northeast. I missed all my friends in Dallas.
Let's see. And I forgot to ask you about your brother. What was your brother's name?
So my brother's name is Don, and Don has passed away about 24 years ago, but Don was 5 years older than me. And you know, the best thing to say about my brother is he was a great big brother. He went to SMU, but my dad, being a traveling salesman, when my dad would go out on the road for 2-3 weeks at the time, my brother and I would take care of each other, basically. He would take care of me. So we became very close. We became very, very close.
That's nice. So where did you end up going to college?
I ended up going to my first year. We get back to Dallas. It's late in September by the time my dad decides, okay, we're going to move back. He found a job, and I couldn't get it. University of Texas was my dream school. It was too late to get in, and the draft was going on, so I knew I had to get into college. So my dad said, why don't we go up to Denton? And I was able to register like a week and a half late as a student. So my freshman year, I went to North Texas State in Denton, which is now University of North Texas. And then I transferred my sophomore year to the University of Texas, and that's where I graduated from.
And what did you study at?
I studied accounting, so I have a business degree in accounting.
And is it useful for you now in your business?
You know, Mitch, it's a good question. I guess I was a kid that didn't really, I just was a happy-go-lucky kid, and when I went off to college to have fun and, you know, make more friends and meet new girls and that type of stuff. And my dad said, you know, Mike, you ought to be an accounting major. That's what your brother's going to be. I just think it's a great background to have. You'll never have trouble getting a job. So I majored in accounting, not thinking anything of it. But now that I look back at it all these years later, it really is a great skill set to have. Not preparing a tax return, but just understanding numbers. So throughout my business life, first couple of years out of college, I worked for an accounting firm, but then after that, I ultimately got in the real estate business. And I always felt like, still to this day, that having that knowledge of numbers and having some common business sense with numbers has always helped me out in life and in my career. So.
Excellent. So during your college years, you know, talk a little bit about that, what was going on politically. I know there's a war going on, the hippie generation.
Yeah.
Talk just
so the Vietnam War was going on, and you know, it was a very controversial time, and students at that time were extremely active against the war all over the country, especially in Austin. Austin seemed to have a little bit more of a active student life against the war. What's interesting is I was a year ahead of a lot of my close friends, Mark Shore, Ronnie Meyers, and the guys that I was with, there almost was like a year separation. So even though I was against the war, my activism against the war wasn't as great as people that were maybe a year or 2 or 3 years younger than me. So even though I was against the war, I never really was involved in that many anti-war protests the way some of my friends were. I didn't attend any marches. I was still, I guess, a good, just kind of clean-cut straight-laced kid, never really, I grew my hair a little bit, but never really became much of a hippie.
So, can you talk a little bit about how you changed from, high school? Here you are, you've got a lot going on. Mother had passed,
Right.
father moved
Yeah.
on, but
Yeah.
now you're in college. This is really
Right.
what a time of
Sure.
growth. Because you see it coming, like when you're getting out of college soon. Like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it just kind of evenly flowed. My dad was a pretty disciplined guy. He basically said, okay, I'm going to send you to college. I don't have much money. You got 4 years. You need to finish in 4 years, because if you don't finish in 4 years, that's it. So I was driven to finish. But I probably, Mitch, was a little on the immature side. And once again, was not really thinking about my future as much as maybe what some of my other friends were at the time. I pretty much thought, you know what, I'm going to get out of college. I'm going to go to work for a CPA firm. And that's what I did. My senior year at Texas, I interviewed with a number of CPA firms on campus. Almost thought about moving to Houston. We didn't. And I went to work for a CPA firm in Dallas. Lane Gorman Trubit was the name of the firm. And how I met them was they were my dad's accountant.
So did you meet anybody in college that?
Well, I dated a girl really from second semester of my sophomore year, which really was my first year at Texas. I dated the same girl all the way through the time that I graduated, and her name was Mara Schlater. She has since passed away in the last couple of years of cancer. Have great memories. It was one of the first loves of my life, but I guess as the couple of years went by in college and our relationship continued to grow, we kind of got to a point where we were either going to get married or break up and look for another person. And I just didn't feel that she was the right person for me. So I broke up with her. And look, it turned out to be a right move.
Excellent. And tell me about your wife.
So yeah, about 2 years later, I lived in Dallas. I was already out of college, and about 2 years later, I met my wife. Her maiden name was Bonnie Hess, born and raised in Houston, Texas. So I married a real Texan, and we got married in January of 1972. And we've lived in Dallas, and we actually, the first year and a half, we lived in Houston. She wanted to live in Houston. And I took a job down there in the accounting world, and decided after I was down there, I wanted to get back to Dallas as quickly as possible. And a year and a half later, I convinced Bonnie to move back to Dallas. We came back. It's still pretty easy to get a job. And so, she is still the love of my life. We've been married 48 years, be 49 this next year. Had 3 children, and
tell me their names.
What's that?
Tell me your children's names.
Children's name is Mark, who's 43, Meredith, who's 36, and Emily, who's 32. And we have 5 grandchildren. Mark is married to Ashley Eltis, who's got Dallas background, but she was originally from Tyler. They have 3 beautiful grandchildren from them: Jacob, who's 15, Jonathan, who's 12, and Sarah, who is 8. And then Meredith, my beautiful daughter Meredith, is not married, but she is in a very serious relationship, so we have very high hopes. And then Emily, my youngest daughter, is married to a guy named Brett Lusky, who is one of my favorite people too. And Brett and Emily have brought us Caleb and Sydney. Caleb is 4, and Sydney is 2. So everyone lives here in Dallas. So we're very, very fortunate. Families today seem to be spread out, and we're very lucky.
That was
very
great.
lucky. Yeah.
So tell us about some of your jobs that you've had over the years, and then what are you doing now?
Sure. I had a bunch until I finally figured it all out. But, I worked in the accounting world, and then I had the opportunity to still stay in accounting, but it wasn't in public accounting. I went to work for a Dallas family. I guess the best way to explain this is, so when my dad and I and my brother moved back down to Texas, this is before I went to college, he divorced his wife in New York. 3 years later, when I was a junior in college, he married a woman here. Her name was Estelle, excuse me. Can't believe I can't remember her first name. I've been doing great. Eleanor Green.
Eleanor Green.
And she is related to a bunch of Davidoffs in town. And her daughter was married to a gentleman who's still around, still a good friend of mine, Charles Davidoff. And Charles had a company at the time, and I got to know Charles through my dad's marriage to Eleanor. And Charles had a growing company. They sold industrial cleaning compounds, and he needed a financial guy in there, and he hired me. So I did that for a couple of years until I was approached by a guy named Ronald Francis Meyers, who is probably my oldest and longest lifetime friend besides Mark Shore here in the Dallas area. And Ron was young, and he said, look, I have the opportunity. He said, I think we can start a property management company. I have the opportunity to manage all these apartments. Someone came to us, or through Ronnie's relationship with Sonny Schwiff, someone came to us and thought we did a good job running the apartments we own, needed someone else to run it. Mike, I don't have time to do it because I'm building apartments with Sonny. I think you'd be perfect. You and I will start a property management company. I said, Ron, what do I know about property management? He said, you got a lot of common sense, you got number sense, that's property management. It's a people business. And Ron and I started this company, Lynn Management Company, and we built a successful company until 1976 when Ron decided that he was going to move to Houston and go into his wife's family business. So long story short, I bought Ron out and have been in the real estate business ever since then. Moved around a few places in the real estate business. My company eventually sort of dried out on its own, so I had to go back to work for people, and worked for various companies until 1993, when I fell into the opportunity to manage about 1,500 apartment units. And I formed a company with a guy here in town named Mike Kotwitz. And we've been partners ever since. We still are, although I'm not an active partner anymore. And Mike and I built a great company, and really it's been a great career for both of us.
Fantastic. And one of your sons, Mark is in?
Yeah, so that's the last part of the story, is that in, let's figure this out. My grandson is 15, so 15 years ago, in say about 2000 and, would that be about 2013, say, or 2014, Mark and Ashley were living in Austin at the time. He was working for Dell Computers, but in the financial side of their business. Jacob, our oldest grandson, was just about a year old. And Mark called me one night and said, Dad, Ashley and I want to move back to Dallas. We want to, now that we've had Jacob, we had our nice 5 or 6 years in Austin, but we want to be back around family. And he said, I want to go in the real estate business with you. And I said, oh my God. I said, I've been waiting for this day for you to tell me that. So I said, I don't know what we're going to do, Mark, but we'll figure it out. And I wasn't able to figure out a way to bring Mark into my existing partnership with Mike Kotwitz. That company is named Fairmont Management Company. But it just seemed like the best avenue was to start a second company with Mike's permission, of which is Mark and I were principals in, and it's called Sunwest Real Estate Group. The difference between the two companies is Fairmont was mainly at the time doing a lot of property management and some investing in multifamily properties. Sunwest was going to concentrate on the commercial real estate market, primarily office buildings and warehouses. And since then, we've also gotten involved in retail properties too. So for all those years, I actually had since about 2012 or 13, I had two businesses. We operated them out of the same office. I thought to myself, well, I don't know if this will work out. I got two partners on either side. It worked out. We still office together. And to fast forward, about 3 years ago, I kind of stepped aside the everyday involvement in both companies. And my son-in-law, Brett Lusky, took over my position in Fairmont, and Mark assumed all the ownership in Sunwest. And I'm still around. I have some things to keep me active, but I'm basically not involved in the day-to-day management anymore.
That's a great story.
Yeah,
I appreciate
yeah,
you sharing
sure.
that with everybody.
Sure.
So we're going to wind it down, but I just wanted to ask you if you have any advice, knowing that this is your oral history you want to share with your children first, that you'd like to say to them.
You know, I think as I've gotten older, I realize you need to live life to its fullest. This is what I tell my kids there, and I tell my grandkids this. And if you have a dream in life, you need to make every effort to try to accomplish that dream or accomplish that goal. And don't just sit back and not be active. You need to get out there. The other thing the other two things that I really tried as a parent and still try as a parent and grandparent is, I think we all need to give back to the community. And I started doing it, Bonnie and I both started doing it at a very early age. I got involved with the Federation when I was in my late 20s, and Bonnie got involved with National Council of Jewish Women. And it only grew as the years went on. And I'm not talking doesn't only have to be monetary support. What it has to be is just caring about finding your passion, finding an organization that you care about, and devoting your time and your efforts to that organization so that organization, does well and accomplishes what it's set out to accomplish. And the last thing is just, Judaism. I mean, it's I'm not a religious Jew, but it's a very important part of Bonnie's and my life. And fortunately, it still remains an important part of my children's life. All 5 of my grandkids are at Levine Academy until Jacob graduated last year. Now he's at St. Mark's, so he went from a Jewish day school to St. Mark's, but whatever. I think Judaism, to me, the survival of Jewish people is of utmost importance. And we all as Jews have to strive to continue that. We live in some very challenging times right now.
I appreciate that. So any advice just for your grandchildren that you want to share? I mean, it could be the same thing.
Yeah, it's similar. I just, as when they're young, I just tell them, look, just enjoy life, have as much fun. Don't live within a box. If you've got a passion, go for it. One of my grandsons just recently experienced, one of his first major disappointments in life. He was one of the final cuts from his 9th grade basketball team. And it was pretty, it was a pretty tough moment for him. And of course, Mark and Ashley were great dealing with it, but I was alone with him one day. I said, Jacob, you need to pick yourself back up. First of all, I know you've always been involved in a lot of recreation leagues, so you need to continue to play. I know you love basketball, and you need to strive to get better. And then when the 10th grade team tryouts come out next year, you go out for the team again, and hopefully you make it. So it's really, what I tell them is just to try to enjoy life and try not to let the little things bother you.
That's great.
Yeah.
So last question, what legacy do you want to leave for the next generation of young Jewish boys and girls? I know you touched on it a bit, but anything just specific you want to?
Yeah, no, just how important it is I think how important it is to support not only charities, but in my eyes, the most important is support Jewish charities. My dad told me a long time ago, if the Jews don't take care of the Jews, I don't know how many other people will look after us. So as a Jew and as someone who wants to see the survival of the Jewish race or Jewish religion, I would, hope that they continue to be good Jews. They continue to do mitzvah projects. They continue to live their life by Jewish laws, to follow the rules of tzedakah and follow the rules of just living as a good, honest, hardworking person. So
That's great.
that's it.
So Mike, I really appreciate you sitting with us and taking the oral history for the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. I want
Sure.
to thank you very much. And it's been great talking to you and learning, and you've living a blessed life, so I'm
Right.
very proud of you.
Well, thank you, Mitch. It's been a pleasure.